Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. If you were born and raised in New York City, you've probably been accused of speaking with what many people call a New York accent. It comes down to using words that are unique to New Yorkers and pronouncing other words in a way that only New Yorkers do. What are the hallmarks of a New York way of speaking? A group of linguists from the City University of New York and the University of Pennsylvania have spent years compiling a catalog of New York-isms. And sharing the results of their research with us today is Cecelia Cutler, professor of linguistics at Lehman College and the CUNY Graduate Center. Welcome.
Thank you.
I just want to say that the project that you're involved in is called the Corpus of New York City English. Tell me how the project came about and exactly what you and your colleagues have been doing for the past 3 years.
Michael Newman wrote a book called New York City English in 2014, and Christina Tortora at College of Staten Island put together a corpus of Appalachian English a number of years ago, and we became aware of each other's work and thought, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we all collaborated on a larger grant to basically put together a large corpus of New York City English so that we could do similar work to the Appalachian corpus. Putting together a corpus entails interviewing hundreds of people, sampling, recording their speech, and transcribing their speech. And once you have a corpus, then it can be open to many, many different people from different disciplines to study, particularly linguists, but historians might be interested in this kind of thing, or sociologists. So it's a corpus that's open to the larger academic community.
Is it mostly students who go out to record these speech patterns? How do you decide where to send the students and who they will interview?
A large component of the corpus, or the NSF project, I should say, was to involve undergraduates in this research project. So because we all teach at different CUNYs around New York City, we thought this would be a perfect opportunity to have students go out into their own communities and interview people in their families or friends of theirs or acquaintances in their communities to get the most optimal sample of speech from different parts of New York City. So we have people in Queens, we have people in Brooklyn, we have people in the Bronx, some in Manhattan, but also Staten Island, a few in New Jersey, a few in the outlying areas of Yonkers and Long Island, as a demonstrative, wonderful sample of New York City English.
How many people altogether are going to be interviewed for the study?
We've mostly wrapped up the interview dimensions of the project. We have approximately 300 interviews, a few more than 300 interviews.
So what kinds of questions do you ask them? I assume you're trying to get them to speak the way they speak, but so what does the survey questions look like?
We ask people about their lives. We try to make it informal and comfortable for them so that they would optimally tell stories about their lives or what it was like to grow up in New York City when they were children, the kinds of schools they attended, what their teachers were like, what their friends were like, the kinds of games that they played, if they remember historic events in New York City's past, the great snowstorms, the blackouts, major events, 9/11, for example, if they have personal stories to tell about those particular events, the kinds of people they went out with in school, the kinds of movies they like, the kind of music they're into, things like that. The idea of the interview is the sociolinguistic interview is to get people to relax and to talk about themselves and to not think about the way they speak. And that's how you get a natural example of someone's speech.
What do the students record the interviews on? I mean, they used to be tape recorders and then there were smartphones. Are they doing recorders? Are they doing smartphones or
we
what?
Have small digital devices called Zoom recorders.
Okay.
We've been using.
Okay. And so once you've got all of these interviews, what do you do with them?
The first step is to transcribe the interviews in a piece of software that's called PRAAT, P-R-A-A-T, and PRAAT is the Dutch word for talk. So some Dutch linguists developed the software, but it basically allows you to transcribe and match the speech waves with the words themselves. So you have a transcript that shows the speech wave, the frequencies of the speech, and then you see the transcript. And that allows you to actually pinpoint particular pronunciation patterns that you want to examine.
So it's both an oral transcript and a text transcript.
Indeed.
Okay. And the ultimate goal, I read, is to come up with a 1 million word corpus of New York City English, which will then be available in what form, where, and how?
The idea is to make this publicly accessible through a website. So the corpus, the actual data, will live on a server, but will have an interface where people can see the corpus and do searches on the corpus for particular words or particular sound patterns.
Will there be some kind of research paper that comes to conclusions about those findings, or you're just presenting the corpus as it is?
The first step is just to publicize the corpus, to complete the corpus and to publicize it, to make it available to the public. And the second step is to actually do linguistic analyses using the corpus. So we're in the process of doing some small studies with smaller parts of the subsets of the data, but we were not able to analyze the entire corpus yet because it's not completed. So it has to be completely transcribed, completely cleaned up, and then it's actually parsed for part of speech. It's part of speech tagged, we call it, so that you could actually do grammatical analyses, syntactic analyses on the data as well. So that process is still ongoing, but when the corpus is completely complete, it will be available for people to analyze.
When you talk about, when we talk about talking like a New Yorker, mm-hmm. Are there movies that highlight the New York accent?
I mean, hundreds. Taxi Drivers, one.
You talking to me? You talking to me?
And I mean, you could think of Moonstruck, I think, is another.
Snap out of it!
I can't.
There are literally dozens and dozens of television shows and movies that are set in New York and that have New York English-speaking characters.
How about public figures who speak with New York accents? Somebody said Bernie Sanders is a good example.
Bernie Sanders is a wonderful example. I mean, he was raised in Brooklyn, and despite living in Vermont for many, many decades,
never lost his New York accent.
I want to wish all of you the very best of luck in your future endeavors. May I not be strangled. All right, I'll tell you what, that's it.
It's actually quite difficult to lose your New York City accent. It's difficult to change your vowels, and people try, but there's always a little bit of residual evidence of your New York City English.
So what are some of the characteristics that distinguish New York City speech from other kinds of speech?
Some of the things we're looking at in the corpus is the tendency to drop the R after a vowel. So if you think about words like car, or park, or fourth, floor, you'll hear some New Yorkers drop the R in those words. Like they'll say something like park instead of park, or car instead of car. And so we're looking at that particular feature. We're also looking at the tendency to raise the vowel in words like thought and coffee. So you might hear some New Yorkers say something like thought or coffee instead of thought and coffee. And so we're seeing some changes in those vowels, in those sounds. Another one is the tendency to have a tense pronunciation of the ah sound in words like kick the can or ask instead of can and ask. And so there was a complex set of conditioning factors which determine when people tend to use these sounds and when they don't. And New Yorkers will have this very, very distinctive pattern. It's a little too complex to explain here, but you hear that here in New York, but then you don't hear it in other places. So New Yorkers have a distinction between two sounds. If you think about the man's name, Dawn, D-O-N, and the woman's name, D-A-W-N,
right.
New Yorkers say those two names differently. They tend to say something like Dawn for the man's name and Dawn for the woman's name. As you move out to the West Coast, in the central part of the country in the West Coast, people merge those two vowels. And where I grew up in Oregon, we say those two names exactly the same, Dawn
Interesting.
and Dawn. So New Yorkers preserve a distinction in language that is actually reflected in spelling and goes back to older forms of English.
There's also kind of nasal quality to New York speech. Would Fran Drescher be the example of that, or?
She's a wonderful example of that.
Jody! Ma!
Your voice, it carries.
People point to that a lot. There's a nasal kind of tendency. Once again, this is not everybody in New York, but some people in New York City tend to have a more nasal pronunciation. People also talk about a much more engaged conversational style that's typical of New Yorkers, who tend to talk a lot, to pepper people with lots of questions, to interrupt or overlap in their conversational style, to grab people's arms, to stop in the middle of the street and tell a story and want to see someone, eye to eye. So this highly engaged conversational style is also very, very typical of a lot of people who've grown up in New York City.
And I read there are some words that are really used mostly in New York. For instance, the word pocketbook to describe a woman's purse originated in New York. Is that correct?
I think Christina Tortora might be able to say something more about that. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that one. But it's a particular pronunciation of pocketbook. I'm not sure if pocketbook came from New York City itself, but people tend to say something like pocketbook. It's a kind of like all kind of mushed together.
Okay.
So I think that might have been what she was referring to when she included that one in our survey. Mm-hmm.
People often talk about the Bronx accent or the Brooklyn accent, but actually you found that no such thing really exists.
It's an open question. We haven't definitively determined whether there's some kind of distinction between different boroughs in New York City. It's widely believed by New Yorkers that there are differences between the five boroughs. What we are finding is that those differences are really based on ethnic differences, and because you have different populations living in Queens versus the Bronx and Brooklyn, that people tend to associate ethnic styles of New York City English with those boroughs rather than the geographical region itself having something distinctive about it.
Okay, so we think there's a distinct Italian accent that we may have picked up not just in New York, but also in New Jersey. We think about the Sopranos.
Yes.
Jewish accent?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Any particular characteristics of the Jewish accent?
Well, you'll hear subtle differences. I mean, we haven't looked at the subtle differences between, say, Jewish and Italian accents, but people can readily identify them. And it might come down to some of the word choices that people are making. If somebody says something like "forget about it," it might be more associated with an Italian style of New York accent. A lot of Jewish New Yorkers might use some old Yiddishisms, like mensch or schlep, to carry something, and so you might tend to hear those more in particular communities. But it's also very typical that those expressions have spread out and that people understand them quite broadly here.
Yeah, because I would think African American New Yorkers would have their own set of terms and pronunciations, and a lot of people use those as well.
Absolutely.
How about Asian American New Yorkers?
There's some interesting work by Amy Wong at NYU on Asian American New Yorkers, and remarkably, as in other ethnic groups, there's sort of a common set of features. So these vowels that I've been talking about those patterns are found among lots of different ethnic groups. So they might have their own styles, they might have their own words that they use and expressions that they use that are different from other ethnic groups, but they have a common shared core of pronunciation features which mark them as New Yorkers.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. Then we'll be back with Cecelia Cutler, professor of linguistics at Lehman College and the CUNY Graduate Center, and a member of the New York City English Research Group. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy, and I'm talking with Cecelia Cutler, professor of linguistics at Lehman College and the CUNY Graduate Center, and a member of the New York City English Research Group. Is the New York way of speaking helpful in certain lines of work and probably not in others? I mean, someone has suggested that it could be helpful in politics.
We're seeing something very, very interesting in that so many New Yorkers are actually entering or have entered the political arena. We have Donald Trump, of course. We have Bernie Sanders, and Mayor Bloomberg is actually not originally from New York, but he spent a lot of time here. So we have an interesting phenomenon where I think people in the rest of the country are very attracted and maybe repelled and attracted at the same time by the very directness of many New Yorkers. The direct style, calling people out, criticizing people directly to their face, calling people names. This kind of directness is something that people in the rest of the country find rather shocking and I think intriguing. And I think it's associated now in Donald Trump's rhetoric, for example, with telling the truth or saying things how they really are.
Telling it like it is.
Telling it like it is, whether or not that's actually true. So, yeah.
The professors in your research group are all linguists, and I think you have occasionally described yourself as a sociolinguist. Explain to me what linguistics is.
Linguistics is a social science. And it's a science that is looking at language as if it were like a cell in biology. It's breaking down language into its small constituent parts, into the sounds of language, into the parts that make up words, morphemes, how you make up sentences, what sentences are constructed of, and how you form larger stretches of speech, which we call discourse.
I've come across linguistics classes at Queens College where I teach. And, you know, and I've often wondered, one, what linguistics is, and you've told me, but if one gets, say, a degree in linguistics, what can one do with it? What do we use a knowledge of linguistics for?
A number of applied linguistic domains would be teaching a language, teaching French, teaching English as a second language or a foreign language. So armed with an understanding of how language is constructed and made up, you're more equipped to be able to teach language. But there are also a number of applications for language, understanding language structure in the media technology sector, for example, in programming languages, understanding how to interact with computers, creating artificial languages. In some cases, linguists have consulted on films for how to write Klingon or how to create a grammar of a language like Klingon for Star Trek, but many other invented languages for films. But then also, I think particularly with understanding the new world of computer technology. So for example, there are a lot of linguists now working for Google. There are a lot of linguists working for tech companies trying to better understand how to tweak search engines, how to sample databases, how to extract information from large databases using these artificial or constructed computer languages that humans have developed, but this is our way of interacting with large databases and computer systems.
What drew you to the field?
I was initially very, very interested in the fact that there were differences in the way people spoke. I found growing up where I did that
In Oregon?
In Oregon, that I wasn't very exposed to large differences between the way people spoke. It was a very homogenous community. When I moved to New York City to come to college, I was struck by how differently people spoke in New York City, but also how differently people from different social groups spoke and how interesting that was. I saw a PBS special many, many years ago in the 80s called The Story of English that intrigued me. And then I later taught for a couple of years in the public schools, and I was struck by the differences between different students coming in, also students at the stage of adolescence making choices about how they wanted to talk. And many of them were immigrants, and they would kind of map their speech onto a particular group that they wanted to identify with. I found that very interesting, that language isn't just something that is reflexive, that you have no control over, that it just happens, but that people actually agentively decide how they want to sound, and that the way you speak is a very fundamental part of your identity.
I grew up in the Deep South in Alabama, and Southern speech was very distinctive at that time. It seems to me that nowadays Southerners don't talk as Southern as they used to, that there's been a melding of speech patterns between North and South. I mean, am I blowing smoke, or do you think there's anything to that?
You know, people have speculated that the media and exposure to different ways of talking, and the more you travel and the more educated you are, that the less distinctive your speech becomes in a way, that the less kind of geographical marking there is in your speech, and that's probably true. But I'm also struck by how long-standing the differences are between different groups of people around the country. Just listening to the impeachment hearings yesterday and the vote, many congressmen retain quite notable features of Southern English in their speech and are certainly not ashamed of that whatsoever. In fact, I think that retaining speech markers from particular geographical regions is a great advantage for some people in politics.
And a point of pride.
Yes, as a way to signal to their constituents that they are real and authentic, a real member of the community.
Are there things that you discovered in the course of the study that have surprised you?
Since we're just really at the initial stages of collecting this data, we don't have a lot of information we don't have a lot of results at this point, but there has been some intriguing findings in among the young people in Queens who conducted some interviews with mainly immigrant young people from Latino and Asian backgrounds. And what was really striking is that some of those young people are using vowel patterns that you'd find more typically in California. So the oo sound that you have like in words like dude or tube are quite fronted for a lot of young people in California. They'll say instead of dude, they'll say like dude, or instead of tube, like tube. And we're hearing some young people in New York City mimic
immigrants in Queens, speaking like
that. Queens, imitating those particular vowel patterns. So once again, that points to identity, and that some young people, because it's not everybody, seem to identify with perhaps some of the cultural dimensions of young California people, surfers, for example, or maybe skateboarders or something like that. It might have something to do with some of those subcultural resonances, but we're still looking into it.
And we only have about a minute and a half left. Did you start your research with any assumptions, and are there assumptions that were confirmed by research and others not?
Well, we know that there are changes, ongoing changes in New York City English. A lot of people say or ask, is the New York City accent disappearing? And we just say, it's changing. It's not going away, it's simply changing. So we know it's changing. We see some of those changes happening as we speak, and we can assume at this point that those changes are going to culminate in something that looks kind of different in the future than it does now. But we don't have definitive answers. We just know that the accent is changing.
I'm afraid we're out of time. I would like to thank Cecelia Cutler, Professor of Linguistics at Lehman College and the CUNY Graduate Center, for joining me today and telling me about her very interesting study of New York, the way New Yorkers speak. For One to One and the City University of New York, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.